Hello and welcome back to a brand new season of the Bonsai Show. My name is Mark Akins. This is Repot Bonsai, where we do the filming. And in this episode, I want to start off by talking about the beginning of the bonsai event season and purchasing. We're hot off the back of an event yesterday. Obviously, there's a lot of frenzied buying that goes on at these, and I really wanted to talk to you about what to look for when you come to buy a tree, whether it's your first one or you're further down the line. So I'll start with this tree, seeing as I'm holding it, and what I'm looking at is when you're going to spend your hard-earned money on a tree, really look at buying the best quality trunk you can. This is obviously a lot more developed, but if it wasn't, I would still be advising to buy the best possible trunk. And what we can actually then do with the tree is develop the foliage over the coming couple, 2-3 years. And not only do you develop the tree, but hopefully during that time, the tree develops you. And as a good further example, I know you've seen this tree plenty of times if you've been following the series, but purchasing the trunk, and in this case a very dynamic trunk, will give you much more reward over a short period than buying and paying for a completed tree that really you don't do any work on other than going out, feeding and watering, and you then obviously have the rest of the work to keep it in shape and in good condition. So I've got a few more examples of this in the polytunnel that we'll move on to. And then we'll start talking a little bit later about when to repot and making some choices on that subject. Okay, to continue, these are all examples of trees which some cost very little, some cost an awful lot. But again, we start looking at the trunk structure of all of these trees, and I'll quickly run through them in order. But the very expensive end, we have blackthorn. Obviously this is a piece which is more developed, but if you were looking at buying this in a much more raw state, you can appreciate the trunk line on each of these in here. We next have a Sabina juniper. This was a Spanish import. And again, you can see the trunk on this tree that if we were to attempt to grow this from a small seedling or sapling, it would take us a very long time. So what my advice, and I'm sure the advice of many bonsai professionals, we buy the trunk, we can grow the foliage, whatever state it's in. Another good example of that, to the further along buying the trunk, is this Japanese black pine. And it is somewhat bare. We took some growth off this, but you can see that to grow this trunk would take us 15, 20 years, maybe longer. And although it's a little bit sparse in foliage, we can deal with that. We can grow that out, we can develop it, and I would like to think that, assuming this was here for that long, 2, maybe 3 years, and this could be a really nice tree. The final one here is a Inoki cypress, a Seca, and again you can see really that what you're paying for in that tree is the entirety of what you see, the trunk and the foliage, but again you are paying for that kind of development in a tree. So the next thing that I would like to talk about is repotting, and we get a lot of questions, and I see a lot of questions on social media around when do you repot trees, and they all differ, whether it's coniferous, and just in the pines you can get differences in when is best to repot them, and there are some scientific reasons to repot early, some for late, and we'll come on to that in later episodes. The deciduous material really is a bit more movable, in that what we have to look at is not when a book tells you it's time to repot. You read most books, bonsai books, and they'll tell you to repot a deciduous tree in spring. But the real question is, when exactly is spring? Because that's a movable target given climate change. So what we will look at in the next piece is showing you the difference between when is too early, when is just right, and when is too late. So we'll come on to that in just a minute. Okay, so we're back with repotting and specifically when to repot, because as I mentioned, we get a lot of questions about when to repot. I see a lot of questions on social media about when to repot, and I know that it's not an easy subject in the entirety of bonsai to deal with. So as part of this series, we're going to break that down on the basis that the last series we came in kind of midsummer. This one we've got the whole growing year to discuss this matter as we go along. So we're going to start with straightforward deciduous material. Trees like this one at the back, which is deciduous but is early flowering, we will come back to at some point. But to quickly answer that one and not leave you hanging, we will repot this one just as the flowers fade and the new leaf growth comes out. So if we stick with purely deciduous trees, and what we have here are trident maples. They are slightly different varieties of trident maples. And as an example, just to explain that, you'll see that this particular tree has much finer branch growth than this one. And this one has much smaller leaves than this one when it is out. So there are slightly different genetic changes between species, but there are also slight genetic differences between exactly the same species. And if we start with the one that I've got in my hand, this is a small trident maple, and at the moment is showing no sign of pushing new leaves. The buds are not particularly swollen. This tree was kept outside, and as a result, in the shade, it's a little bit behind some of the other trees. We'll pick on this one next, and this one's probably the best example of what I'm talking about. That although that one was nowhere near, this particular one is about right. The buds have swollen, they're just bursting into leaf, and now would be the perfect time to repot this tree. But the one that is sitting right alongside it is already out in leaf, as good as, and this one, although you might get away with it because it's trident maple and it's quite strong, for the sake of giving you straight advice, this would be too late. If it was any other variety of tree, such as a Japanese maple, this would be too late. This would be just right. And we have going back to the other trident maple here, this one is just on the cusp. You can see that some of those buds have burst into leaf. Some of them are still just getting to that point. So again, we could look to do a repot on this tree if we really wanted to. I did a repot on this tree about a weekend ago in order to take to the event that we were at this weekend. So that one is done. This one isn't. This one will go back into the development polytunnels to grow and for us to add ramification, and we can talk about the way that we'll achieve that over this coming season with pruning and probable defoliation on this particular tree. So that is when. Obviously the next question is how, and we're going to leave that until the next episode. So what we'll be looking for to achieve in episode 2 this season is how to prepare a tree, how to identify, according to guidelines, what is the right pot, and how to go through that process of doing a repot end to end, which will obviously be a good follow-up to this piece. But until then, have a good week, and we'll see you next week.